And members of Ukraine's Special Forces unit held military training in a residential area in the southeast of the country to teach them self-defense in case of an attack from Russia. Well, the battalion, part of Ukraine's National Guard, trained residents to assemble and disassemble a gun, to load ammunition, as well as aim at targets. Volunteers for the training included young and even the old. They understood foreign concerns about evacuating diplomats and said they wanted to be prepared in case they came under attack. And to look at those developments in detail, we can now speak to Arise Special Correspondent Karl Bostic, who is in London. Karl, thank you so much for being here. And Karl, we're hearing that Moscow is actually keeping the door open for diplomacy here, which is good news. Well, bring us up to speed about this new development.
It's too early to say whether it's good news or not, Maka, but it's certainly a far cry from what we heard over the weekend, because on Saturday you had President Joe Biden holding an hour-long phone conversation with Russia's Vladimir Putin, and after that, the situation was very grim. They were saying that the dynamics had not changed at all in terms of a possible intention to invade Ukraine. So if anything, they were saying there was no breakthrough at all. Sunday, President Joe Biden spoke with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Again, President Biden expressing solidarity and support for Ukraine, but not willing to commit any U.S. troops or NATO involvement with Ukraine. At the end of that conversation, in fact, Ukraine's President Zelensky invited President Biden to visit Kiev this week as a way of showing support and as a way to perhaps create de-escalation. And yet now, today, Monday, we've got Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, meeting with the President Vladimir Putin in a televised meeting in which President Lavrov is saying that the door is still open for far-reaching dialogue, to which President Vladimir Putin said simply good. So it's really hard to make what all that means, Amaka, because in the meantime, you've got satellite images which have come out in the past few days which show, if anything, an increasing buildup in the north, the south, the east of Ukraine. Russian troops, which originally estimated to be more than 100,000, then 130,000, now it's about 145,000, with one air base in Belarus. That's a 700-mile border with Ukraine to the north of the capital, Kiev, 2 hours away drive from Kiev. It's an empty airfield that's now filled with helicopters, artillery, and even field hospitals in the event of potential casualties. Right now, the U.S. is preparing for a worst-case scenario. Worst-case scenario is that if there is an invasion, you'd have massive casualties, as many as 50,000 civilians, as many as 5,000 to 10,000 Russian military casualties, and 10 to 20,000 Ukrainian casualties. So right now, as the U.S. is now saying, they're saying that, if anything, Vladimir Putin is at a crescendo moment of opportunity to launch an invasion. And now here we have the foreign minister saying that the door is still open for further negotiations. And by that he's saying that we want to make sure we close the door on any NATO policy, an open door policy that would allow Ukraine to join NATO.
Well, diplomacy is always good, but those, casualty figures that, is being anticipated is quite scary, you must agree. But in the meantime, Karl, German's Chancellor Scholz has been in Kiev today, and of course he's due to actually proceed to Moscow tomorrow. What came out of today's meeting with President Volodymyr?
It's an important meeting because, keep in mind also, Maka, this is the chancellor who's new to the job, only 2 or 3 months in office since Germany's Angela Merkel left the stage after 16 years in power. Angela Merkel was always the undisputed leader of Europe and the foremost interlocutor with Russia's Vladimir Putin. Right now, Europe is leaderless without her. And so now you've got a German chancellor who's been basically silent and almost kind of unclear about what Germany's intentions are. That's in large part because of Germany's dependence on Russia for gas, and more than 50% of its energy comes from Russia. But what we heard today was, for the first time, clear, unequivocal terms where Germany was saying that Ukraine's territorial integrity is non-negotiable. So that was an important instance right there, and that other countries in Europe and the U.S. stood in solidarity with Ukraine. That was also important. But what he did not say, he did not talk about the Nord Stream, Gulf Stream gas pipeline project that would deliver Russian natural gas to Germany that was just completed just a short while ago. Right now, the pipeline of more than 800 miles has been completed, but is not operating because that's one of the possible sanctions, to not make it operable at all. So that's what remains to be seen of what will the Chancellor tell Vladimir Putin tomorrow about the status of this pipeline that President Biden has said will be canceled or delayed if Russia invades Ukraine.
Right, and of course, Karl, we've seen the Ukrainian president really seek for a meeting with the U.S. president. I want to get your take if you think that that would actually help with the crisis. But speaking about the U.S., we've actually heard that, of course, the president as well as others have warned that their citizens should leave Ukraine, anticipating, a strike from Russia against Ukraine. Karl, do we have a time frame when this alleged attack would happen, or you want to call it an invasion?
This all happened on Friday night, Amaka, where we got this announcement that an attack was imminent. It could happen as early as Wednesday. What was unusual about this is that for the first time, the U.S. was sharing declassified intelligence raw information, which it hasn't done before, in an effort to basically preempt Russia, saying that we know what you're up to, we've been across your communications, we know an attack could come as early as Wednesday, before the end of the Olympics, because people thought it would not happen until after the end of the Olympics. So with that said, they were also saying that it's paramount that all Americans and foreigners leave within 24 to 48 hours, because we cannot guarantee their security, and the U.S. will not evacuate Americans. So that's why you've had a scramble for foreign embassies, including the U.S. embassies, to not only scale back their embassy staff in Kiev, but to either decamp, move them out of the country, or move them to Western Ukraine because of the danger, because of the imminent danger. So that's what's going on right there. And the lesson from that, Amaka, is because of what happened in Afghanistan, because they didn't share the intelligence, they didn't create a sense of urgency with the evacuation, and then President Biden's popularity ratings plummeted, dropped. So this time they wanted to be more, shall we say, preemptive by sharing this intelligence, saying that they're in a position to attack as early as Wednesday. And that's why we see what's happening now.
And of course, Karl, we've heard that Dutch airline KLM has halted flights to Ukraine and through its airspace, while Germany's Lufthansa said it is considering a suspension. And even British Airways flights appeared on Monday to be avoiding Ukrainian airspace. What can you tell us about this in about a minute, Karl?
Well, this happened over the weekend, Amaka. I mean, you need to keep in context is this. When airplanes fly over airspace, these are very expensive pieces of equipment, machinery, and you've got passengers involved as well. And they have to also take out a lot of insurance. Well, what happened was that insurance companies say that we cannot cover you in the event of war. And so that's why a charter airline, a private airline from Kiev, canceled its flight from Portugal to Kiev over the weekend. And that's why KLM also suspended flights because of insurance costs that were no longer available. And that's why the Ukraine has now created a $600 million fund to guarantee insurance for carriers that would continue to fly over Ukrainian airspace. In other words, Ukraine's airspace is still open, but airlines flying into Ukraine are now nervous and worried about doing so because they may lose their insurance. So that's the kind of brinksmanship we're at right now because of the risk of flying into Ukrainian airspace, getting shot down, and having no insurance. So that's what Ukraine wants to ward off. And that's why every day is precious right now in terms of whether flights are canceled or not.
Well, only time will tell. Karl Bostic in London, we'll have to say thank you for your in-depth analysis today.